This is a Squiz Kids podcast. Your fresh take on what's happening in the world around you.
Space. Ever since ancient times, humans have been gazing up at the sky and dreaming about what might be up there. And in the last century, we've been competing against each other like crazy to get there. This is your Space Race Squiz Kids Shortcut, a podcast where we dive into the who, what, when, where, why and how of the big news stories. I'm Amanda Bauer.
And I'm Bryce Corbett.
Bryce, some of the most popular Squiz Kids Today stories are about space.
Sure are.
We've reported on rovers exploring Mars, the Deep Space Telescope, and of course we've had our eyes on all the billionaires getting into space exploration.
Oh, yes. And today we're going to take you through why it's been called a space race for almost 100 years, where that race is going now, and who is involved.
Make sure you listen carefully. There'll be a squiz at the end.
Why?
Now, Bryce, I love a good rhyme, but space race also happens to be true. Ever since scientists thought it might be possible for humans to leave the planet, there's been a really intense competition between countries to be the first to do it.
That's right. Since the first rocket ship test flight went up into the sky 70-odd years ago, it's been a race between countries to get there first. And maybe that's not so surprising, considering that the early technology for space exploration was developed during and after a war.
Yeah, it was during World War II, and the Germans invented a type of missile that could travel much further than earlier rockets. They created it, of course, to travel over long distances so that it could be used against countries a long way away. But if you pointed it straight up instead, it was basically the first ever space rocket.
Yep.
So once the war was over, the countries that beat Germany wanted to get their hands on the technology pronto, especially America and the Soviet Union, which was the name back then for Russia and a group of other countries that Russia was controlling.
So why was it particularly the Americans and the Russians?
Well, the two of them wanted to come out of World War II as the global superpower. They both felt that their system of government and way of life was the best, and they each thought that the other one was a real threat to the world. So for almost 50 years after World War II ended, America and Russia were in what was called a Cold War. They weren't actually fighting and shooting each other, but they were competing to be the most powerful country on the planet in just about every way.
Now, Squiz Kids are probably too young to have experienced it, but it was pretty intense. America and Russia were both trying to influence politics all over the world, and that included up in space.
Exactly. They both went to extraordinary lengths to get those German scientists who developed the early missiles to move to their country and work on their space program. And the USA scored early in the space race by taking those long-range rockets and pointing them towards space instead of at another country, and then firing them into the upper atmosphere.
But then, in 1957, Russia streaked ahead when it launched the world's first satellite, Sputnik.
That's right, and the Americans took it pretty hard. And this is when the space race really kicked off, with the lead changing multiple times as rockets got more and more advanced. The real game changer, though, was the Americans' Apollo program, which had the goal of getting humans on the moon.
In many ways, that first space race was over once Neil Armstrong and his crew landed a rocket on the moon in July 1969 and said those famous words as he jumped off the ladder and onto the surface of the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That's right. Basically, America won the race. And by the 1990s, the Cold War was over and the countries of the world had become much more collaborative, which means working together. So Russia and the US, along with 3 other countries, launched the International Space Station 22 years ago. And what it does is orbit the Earth and provide a home from astronauts from many different countries and a base for scientific experiments.
Of course, Amanda, fast forward to now and there's a new space race going on. So where is it going?
Where?
Well, Bryce, the moon is so 1969. Today, there are 2 main races. The first one is all about Mars.
Oh yeah, 2020 was a big year for Mars missions because, as they say, the planets aligned. See what I did there?
They sure did. Once every 26 months, there's a small window where the orbits of Earth and Mars come closer together, and that allows for the quickest and most efficient journey between the two.
Now, there were 3 countries that jumped on board. The United Arab Emirates launched the HOPE mission, which plans to stay in a wide orbit to study Mars's weather and climate systems. The US is up there on Mars with Percy, and more on him in a bit. And just as China has become more powerful down here on Earth, it's also pushed into space with its own Mars mission.
That's right. China's Mars exploration mission is called Tianwen-1, and it landed successfully in May 2021. It's there to study the surface of Mars and search for water ice and liquid water that may be linked with signs of life.
Which is pretty similar to what Percy's doing, right?
That's right. The Americans' Perseverance rover, Percy for short, landed 3 months before China's Mars mission did. So the US won that particular race, and it's been busy snapping pictures, analysing rocks, and basically doing groundwork for future human missions to Mars. And because it's a space race, China wants to land humans on Mars in 2033.
Now, Amanda, we talked about there being 2 races, so who's involved in the other one?
Who?
While the race to Mars has so far been mostly between governments, the second race is between private citizens. Really, really, really rich ones.
That's right. There are a few ultra-rich people getting in on this race, but 3 have been the loudest so far.
Exactly. We've talked about them on Squiz Kids Today in the past. The first one to get into the race was Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, who started Blue Origin in 2000. His idea is to build a permanent base on the moon, build space colonies, and apparently eventually have 1 trillion people living and working in space.
Wowzers. And probably get Amazon deliveries to their space homes too, I would suspect. The next billionaire to join the race, of course, was Tesla's Elon Musk, who started SpaceX in 2002.
Now, he is quite the personality, Bryce, and he calls himself
He sure is.
the Imperator of Mars. That is another word for emperor. His very ambitious plan is to establish a city on the red planet that can sustain itself, so no need for those Amazon deliveries, and then use Mars as a base to further explore the solar system. And then there's a third billionaire in the game, Virgin's Richard Branson. So he established Virgin Galactic in 2004. He sort of came last in that race of getting going, but he won a leg of the latest race by being the first person to launch himself in a spaceship he owned himself. And he just pipped Jeff Bezos at the post. Now, Richard Branson doesn't really want to go to the moon or Mars. He just wants to get into the space tourism game.
Meaning that instead of going on holidays to, say, the Gold Coast, you'd go into space on your holidays.
Exactly. Just a quick trip up and down, and right now it'll cost you anywhere from $250,000 to $20 million. Yeah, a titch more than a trip to the Gold Coast.
Little bit more than the Gold Coast.
And experts do think that over the next few years, the cost will drop and it could one day be affordable for regular people like you and me, Bryce, to take a trip into space.
Now, we wouldn't be good journalists if we didn't mention that there's been some criticism about how these ultra-rich people are choosing to spend their money.
Yeah, that's right. Some people wish that instead of looking to explore space, these ultra-wealthy people would use their money to help solve some of the many problems we have here on Earth.
But then, on the other hand, science is being conducted by SpaceX, Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, and there are plenty of discoveries being made in space that have benefited us down here on Earth. So there is a flip side.
So what do you reckon, Bryce? Would you take a holiday up to space?
For sure, I'd be there in a minute.
I'm a little anxious about tight spaces and heights, so I think I'll go somewhere with a nice beach instead.
Fair enough.
Time for the quiz.
This is the part of the podcast where you get to test how well you've been listening. Question 1. Which country developed the world's earliest space rocket?
That's right, it was Germany. Question number 2. What's the cute nickname for the American rover currently on Mars?
You got it, it's Percy. Question 3. What title has Elon Musk given himself over Mars?
That's right, the Imperator, or Emperor.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining us as we explored the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the space race.
And as we say every day on the Squiz Kids Today podcast, now get out there and have a most excellent day. Over and out.